All right. Good morning, everybody. It is early on the West Coast, so I gotta give Mike. He's gonna be our guest today. A big shout out because I know it's like 7:30 in the morning, and I know what Mike is like. So this is more like 2:30 in the morning for Mike. It's very early. But that said, I'm on my fourth cup of coffee today, people. So I'm in a great mood. Grab your coffee and let's jump in. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the 64th episode of FinTech Insider, the Breakfast Show US. I'm Sam Maule, 11FS Managing Director North America, and I'll be your host for the morning show. Please let us know where you're watching from in the world. Let's see what kind of international audience we have today. Sunaina, by the way, from M Science, good to see you in New York. Glad you could join us. Let us know where you're at in the comments, and we will make sure we give you a shout out. And most importantly, share this thing. So if you look down at the bottom where all the emojis are, you see a little share link in bold white font, whatever font LinkedIn uses. Click on that thing and share this out your network. Let's build up the folks that watch this. Also, smack those like buttons and pick your emoji, whichever one you like. Smack on those, and please subscribe to 11FS on LinkedIn so you never miss a show. And if you got questions, ask them in the comment section. Today's show is going to be a very good one, and we got somebody in a guest, especially for those in the startup world, can give you a lot of feedback. But first off, 3 news stories from the past 24 hours that caught my attention and should catch yours. First one is from CNBC. They report non-farm payrolls jumped by 4.8 million in June, and the unemployment rate fell to 11.1% as the U.S. continued its reopening from the coronavirus pandemic. The Labor Department said Thursday. Economists surveyed by Dow Jones have been expecting a 2.9 million increase in a jobless rate of 12.4%. So the report was released a day earlier than usual due to the July 4th U.S. holiday. The jobs growth marked a big leap from 2.7 million in May, which was revised up to 190,000. The June total is easily the largest single month gain in U.S. history. However, because the government survey comes from the middle of the month, it does not account for the suspension or rollbacks in regions hit by a resurgence in coronavirus cases. Jobless claims remained stubbornly high last week, with another 1.427 million Americans filing, above the estimate of 1.38 million. Continuing claims actually increased by 59,000 to 19.3 million, highlighting the jobless problems likely exacerbated by the ongoing presence of the virus and its economic impact. I will say this briefly. Good numbers, middle of the month. Be careful about celebrating too much, everybody. Personally, when I view this is a lot of people going back to jobs they already had. That unemployment rate number and new filings concerns me, and I've said this a million times. August is when this gets interesting, as I've said a million times on the show. Next story, CNN. They report Netflix on Tuesday said it would invest in Black-owned banks in an effort to help close the wealth gap between Black and white America. The streaming service announced plans to deposit 2% of its cash, or an estimated $100 million, into Black-owned financial institutions and community development organizations, which have a better track record of lending to minority borrowers than mainstream consumer banks. Minority-owned banks and credit unions represent just 1% of America's total commercial banking assets. Let's read that again. Minorities and credit unions represent just 1% of America's total commercial banking assets. We believe bringing more capital to these communities can make a meaningful difference to the people and businesses in them, helping more families buy their first home or save for college, or more small businesses getting started or growing, Netflix said in their statement. Bravo, Netflix, from me. And finally, The Telegraph reports Monzo co-founder Tom Blumfield has left the digital banking startup's board to make way for the company's new chief executive. Tom, as we call him at 11FS, or Mr. Blumfield, has co-founded the business in 2015 and served as the company's CEO until early this year when he announced he would move to a newly created role as president of the banking startup. T.S. Anil, who has been hired as the company's first U.S. chief executive, now also runs the company's U.K. business as CEO. Insiders say Mr. Blumfield's departure from the board was planned as part of his move to the new president role. They said Mr. Blumfield made the decision to switch roles so he could focus more on the company's strategy rather than meeting his regulatory requirements. Mr. Blumfield owns around 5% of Monzo shares, valuing his stake in the company at a cool, I'm going to read this number again, get really close, 62.5 million pounds. The company, which has grown to more than 4.2 million customers, has 2 board seats for its CEO and chief financial officer, along with seats for major investors and other board members. Mr. Blumfield is still expected to attend board meetings, insiders said, but will not be given an official board observer role. There's a lot you can dig into that story. Obviously, we're fans of Monzo at 11FS. I don't know. I got to dig into more of this. I think giving Tom the freedom to focus on product is not a bad thing. And a founder relinquishing his CEO title gets a little round of applause for me. Good job, Tom. All right, with that, let's bring in our guest. This is a good friend of mine, Mike, out in beautiful San Francisco, founder of, and how do I say this, Mike? Is it 2022 Labs or 20022 Labs?
2002 is what I've settled on.
I like that. 2002 Labs, which actually is a really cool name. We're going to talk about how I come up with that name. And today's show, we'll talk about ISO 2022. What the hell? And what new trends we'd expect to see post-COVID-19. So if you are an ISO fan, damn, this show is for you. And if you're not, the two people in the globe that are so excited, Mike. Oh, we're gonna geek out today. All right, Mike, a little bit about yourself. Let's start with ISO. I think we should start even there. Can you kind of give us a basic definition for the crowd?
Yeah, it's a newish XML standard for encapsulating financial messages, payments, cash, cards, securities. Basically, it's an underlying protocol for how do you define a payment message. Right? It was put into market by Swift. I don't know, it must be close to 10 years ago now. And it's being adopted by central infrastructures, clearing and settlement networks as sort of the lingua franca to normalize and modernize how payments work. And it's beginning to get traction with banks and even corporations.
And Mike, you are incredibly cool because today we've got folks from, ready for this, Kuwait, Oklahoma City. It's the first time I put Kuwait and Oklahoma City in the same phrase. Greece. We were talking about Greece right before we went on. Hungary, NYC, London. Good Lord, folks. And Saudi Arabia. Hey, Dr. Abdul.
You know how much I miss traveling to talk to people? God. I love the fact that there's folks from all over the world. So please, questions, tell me what's going on in your world. I just miss visiting folks.
So Mike and I normally fly every week. And Mike and I, no matter where we're at in the world, will turn and find each other at a coffee shop. And that's the truth. I mean, you can't go to a conference or event without Mike and I being there and having a coffee. Mike's one of those guys that, here's how I would describe Mike. At Money 2020, Mike is the guy that's sitting in that Starbucks just outside of the entrance where he has a table for roughly about 16 hours a day that the seat rotates constantly. Startup at our bank is sitting across from him because of his experience when it comes to startups. And if you don't mind, Mike, let's talk a little bit about that side of you, because you've been a mentor, you've been involved in this space forever and a day. Can you talk a little bit about that and some of the different firms and ventures that you've represented?
Yeah, so I've got I guess 6, 7 startups under my belt if you consider 2022 Labs one. I got sort of addicted to the idea of building companies back when I was in university. So I really have sort of never had a real job, if you will. A couple of those companies' journeys raised funding. Some of them had exits. More of them failed. But I love the process of building a company. At some point, all of that accumulated knowledge or crap in my head became useful to other folks. And so I started mentoring and coaching, which is sort of what landed me in where, the first context you and I met, which would have been the Swift InnoTribe, world, where I was helping Swift build that InnoTribe platform. Since then, I tried my hand at a fintech startup, which I decided not to move forward with. I became an investor for 500 Startups Fintech Fund, where over about 2.5 years, we did 70 early stage investments in 25 countries, and helped the firm a portfolio of, I guess it must be close to 270 fintech startups.
It's huge, by the way, everybody. Yeah. Just so you know, that's.
I heard you had a guest a few weeks back, the woman who was amazing from Barclays Techstars.
Yeah.
And she thought they were the biggest. No. not even close.
There you go, buddy.
Can't say enterprise value, but
yeah.
yeah. So today with regard to startups, right? We've fully deployed our fund. It's doing pretty well, but so with regard to startups, I help out my portfolio companies. I do a lot of coaching. I do some advisory work for startups, helping them with fundraising and strategy and organizational development. And I just love seeing what entrepreneurs will do.
So where did the idea come from to kick off, this latest thing? I mean, what I know there are a ton of ideas that float through your head, right? But why did you think this was going to be incredibly important?
So another part of my life is still consulting to banks and insurers and other corporates. And I was in an engagement where I was introduced sort of more deeply to ISO 20022. And what I saw there was a really interesting technology that could start a shift in how business to business payments are done. But the problem is that payments and technology actually are two different worlds, right? There's sort of the payments world, and then there's the data and business process and all of these worlds. And there was this giant gap between the two. And even though governments and SWIFT and others were mandating adoption of this new standard, the customers, right, the corporations and even the banks who had to adopt this technology that was being mandated, they didn't know what to do with it. And I said, oh, look, there's this giant knowledge gap.
Yeah.
And I probably have the weird set of experience and I don't know, insanity to want to try and fill that gap. Right. And that's where the idea came from, is that sometimes I liken it to HTML, where when it first came out, people played with it, but didn't know what to do with it.
Right.
And it took a lot of experimentation and a lot of education and a lot of communication before folks figured out what to do with it. And I see 20022 is somewhat similar to that. I've had a thesis for investing in what I refer to as CFO Tech, which is sort of tools for the finance groups in large corporations. And I want to continue to work in that area. And starting up the labs is sort of it's a not-for-profit membership organization. Gives me a position to see what's going on in the market, see opportunities, create new relationships, and figure out what else I'm gonna do with 20022.
And you've done a research paper. I just posted the link to this in the comments section.
Oh, thanks.
Everybody, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So for the last 18, 24 months, we've been out talking to corporations about the opportunities in 20022 for them. But frequently we run into this issue where they go, well, that's great. It could, fix some of our operational issues. We can see how we can improve customer experience, where we can create new business lines on top of the data that we get out of this. But don't we have to wait for the entire payment ecosystem to modernize before doing that? And so we wanted to explore the models that would allow a corporation to leverage 20022 in advance of, ubiquitous adoption by payment infrastructure and banks and all of that. So we went out and we talked with a bunch of tech vendors and consultants and a few financial institutions and central bank infrastructures to try and understand how this world could evolve, and what if you were a corporation, or what if you were a payment services provider and you wanted to start getting the benefits in advance of the whole ecosystem, adopting this technology at the very core. And it turns out there's a ton of opportunities there. If you are a corporation, you have an opportunity to change the way in which you interact with your customers or vendors. If you're a fintech, There's a whole world of cool things you can do as a service provider, either to corporations or to banks. And if you're a bank, it sort of gives some insight into what the business models are that you'll be able to create a leadership position as this world shifts. It's you think about the research work that you guys just did with Plaid around open banking, and there's some parallels in that the world said you shall do open banking, and a lot of banks said, how are we going to make money with this? Well, there are a lot of interesting ways. So we're trying to fill that information gap about the models.
I told you before we started the show that you were going to get some very good questions coming in, and we have. So I'm going to start with the first one from Sidhar, who's in San Francisco, just like you. Mike's up in Pacific Heights because he's, that's how he rolls. Quick question. He said, this is a geek question, but sorry, but are the ISO 20022 messages backwards compatible? That is, can old software process new messages by ignoring the new stuff?
There are some techniques and some software vendors that allow you to strip out the enriched data on 20022 messages. But you have to, and again, my geekiness goes only so deep, you have to reformat those messages to make sure that they go through the current payment ecosystem. So, but that's part of where the opportunity lies, is in translation software at the endpoints.
And he had a follow-up question from Sidhar. He said, is the sole value of ISO 20022 is additional metadata per message, or could some of all of this value be extracted by higher level software provided by a billing invoice provider that maintain larger metadata within it, but only sent standard SWIFT messages as they do currently? I told you, I'm going to get good geek questions in here.
Yes. There's a number of different ways to implement it. Yeah. But yeah, if you look at big ERP systems, right, Oracle or SAP or treasury management systems, you can put the translation and the value creation at the endpoints.
Another question. This one's from Sanina. Hey, Sanina. She's at M Science up in New York City. She said, "Hey, Mike, nice to meet you. Can you talk about the Dataful Sandbox? Would love to learn more about that." Dataful. Sorry, folks.
No, it's doubtful. Did you just say doubtful?
I said Dataful. I don't know what I said the first time.
Dataful. Yeah.
My glasses didn't work well. I have to lift my head because I wear, those.
Yeah. Thanks, Sanai. So it ends up being a series of sandboxes that we're trying to construct. The first one, and I'm really psyched, is one of the agreements that we got signed just the other day. In that case, what we're doing is creating a simulation of a number of payment networks, so that folks primarily from corporates can come in and figure out how on building a couple of relationships around message translation tools. We're talking with a couple of different payment vendors about putting their capabilities in the sandbox, so that you as a fintech, or you as a bank, or as a corporation, can rock up and try things out. Most of them will start with a fairly sort of high touch engagement while we figure out what's a scalable model to allow fintechs to come up relatively inexpensively and be able to try things out.
Sweet. Another, and I think this is a really good question, actually, and I love when people peel it back to the basics, which is, where can I start if I want to learn more about this in general? What's a good source to start with?
On our site, 20022labs.com, there's a evolving resource library that can point you at a couple of different things, right? Because a lot of folks have written about all of this, but no one sort of curated it. We're trying to do that. Swift set up a site, I think it's at iso2022.org, and they actually published a book called ISO 20022 for Dummies that I think is a free digital download.
That's a great title. That works.
Yep.
Yellow and with black font and the
The
little dude.
whole shit.
Ah, bless them. Good for them. All right, I want to pivot just a little bit because I love tapping into you've been in the heart of tech trends now for a while, right? I mean, you're based out of San Francisco. Like I said, you've traveled the world, and I always like getting your insight on this, especially in a COVID type that we live in. Where do you look at right now when it comes to fintech as being incredibly hot trends? I mean, obviously, contactless has taken off quite a bit. Yeah. Crypto's done well under this. Different crypto companies have done incredibly well during this time. I mean, what do you look at and say, okay, yeah, that's gonna this specific space within fintech is gonna do really well?
Yeah. So there's a few. One, I mentioned before CFO Tech.
Yeah.
I still really like that because it creates efficiencies for the end customers, and I happen to like enterprise software. And interestingly, 4 or 5 of the top VCs in the last month or so published their thesis on Accounting 2.0 or CFO Tech. So I think that's about to do, one of these. I think financial wellness and resiliency takes on a whole new term when so much of the world's population is in worse and worse straits financially as a result of this.
Mike, that's a good one because in the U.S., PFM, right, so personal financial management, never really took off like it did, say, in the U.K. and others. So I'm not saying that specific little niche will be it, but I do agree with you. I think the concept of financial wellness and solutions that can step in there and address that will do well.
Yeah, we've got a not to promote any of our portfolio companies, but I will talk about one or two of them. We've got a company called Starship that does a health savings account, right? And I think they've gotten a lot of tailwinds. I was chatting with a new entrepreneur the other day who's looking at taking basically taking pictures of health records and insurance records and things like that, and ordering that data. You're taking pictures with a mobile, so create a Dropbox, not using Dropbox, but a structured thing, and then unpacking the data in there to figure out what else should the individual be doing to safeguard their health.
Starship?
This Starship is health savings accounts.
Yeah, great name, by the way. I like that name.
So savings, investing, financial wellness, what are you going to do for your kids? That whole realm, all of a sudden, is much more topical. It's not that folks haven't been working in that area, but I think there's more to do there. I think the protests, just like the news story that you brought up, bring on a whole new color of what it means to create financial inclusion globally, right? When we set up 500's FinTech program, we talked about financial services for the rest of us, and there's a whole other set of I don't know what you want to call it, order of magnitude of work that needs to be done and now is possible and hopefully probable. And then I think the other two other areas. One, I don't know if you saw that chart that I think it was Bank of America about the growth in e-commerce.
Yeah. Yep.
Right? So I think that brings on a whole lot of new or accelerating opportunity in embedded finance, right?
Yeah.
Right. You probably read about Shopify beginning to integrate financial services. I think that's an every tech company opportunity, and all of this, all the work from home and remote work creates a huge opportunity around what is cybersecurity, collaboration, et cetera, mean when you're talking about that in context of a financial institution's way of working?
Man, I think, man, I agree with every single one of those.
Management,
Yeah.
right?
I think,
all of that.
yeah, I agree with every single one of those. And folks, if you want to see a couple of examples of this, because we had some questions that were just raised about this, so definitely take a look at Starship. I'll give you another one that I've always been a big fan of. Tala is now you're talking about micro lending, but using basically SMS data to do that. God, I love Tala. Just a brilliant solution. There's a lot of interesting stuff that, by the way, has been going on. It isn't new because of what COVID has brought out. It's been there.
Right. There's some tailwinds.
Yeah, tailwinds. Good way of putting it.
There's tailwinds for this stuff. You know, like with any downturn, I mean, maybe this isn't the right way to look at it, but with any downturn, there's going to be a lot of folks who were a little overvalued or aren't going to be able to make it. And I think that means that there's a huge opportunity in, you know, talent, or maybe some folks are going to do roll-ups or whatever. So
yeah, I think we're going to see some, what do they call it, Mike? Acqui-hire? Acqui-hire, where, yeah, it is some companies potentially that aren't going to make it through this time frame, and we'll see companies acquired more for grabbing talent, and we're going to see some folks move around. I definitely expect that to happen. I was asked a question, because we only have like 30 seconds left. Dan asked us about a story about Matteo Rizzi, our good friend, formerly at Swift, who started InnoTribe with a small group, and Matteo's just a great friend. Love Matteo. I'll do this really quickly, and I won't go in depth, but I believe Mike was with me in Mexico City when Matteo took us to the very interesting part of town for a steak dinner.
Scarlett, yeah.
Scarlett was there, and a nice little group, JP Nichols and ourselves, and never trust an Italian to pick where you're going to eat at in Mexico City. So that's the only advice I'll give everybody. I won't go any deeper into that story, but
I remember a pretty good meal.
Yeah, the meal was great. The neighborhood was interesting, but
it was a little sketchy.
Yeah, but hey, Matteo can recommend a good steakhouse in Mexico City. All right, that said, thanks for being here, Mike. I really appreciate it. I have had a ton of questions about how do people get in touch with you and learn more. So where's the best place for them to go? They want to reach out.
Find me on LinkedIn, send me a message, or if you're going to send me a link request, make sure you tell me what it is you want.
Because there's a lot of them, by the way, folks. His inbox is inundated. All right, folks, that's going to be it for today. Tomorrow, I'm joined by Judith Irwin. She's the CEO over at Grasshopper Bank, another company that's killing it right now. As always, don't hesitate to reach out to me. If you have this for folks that come on the show, you can ping me at Sam Maule on Twitter, sam@11fs.com, or on LinkedIn. Or you can actually get to the producers directly, which, by the way, is probably the best move, because all I'm going to do is pass your message on to them. And that's at breakfastshow@11fs.com. Everybody, thanks for being there. See you tomorrow.
Bye all.